We're going to be making today a miso peanut sauce. And this is one of my favorite sauces to just throw onto any kind of stir fry vegetables. You can just steam a big pile of vegetables, make some rice, make some noodles. And this is really going to liven it up, but I also really enjoy it because it's got a lot of healthy probiotics, and we're getting a lot of different, we're getting some good acidity from the rice wine vinegar. Garlic is always good for you as well. And a lot of the ingredients that we use today are pretty sustainable as well. So I think it's a really great recipe. It's especially something I think is very versatile for summer or winter. A lot of times, some of our heartier meals can feel more like a winter-focused dish, but with a peanut sauce, and especially with one that has the complexity and the versatility of a miso peanut sauce, what we're looking at is something that you can do hot, like you can do on a stir fry or a big steamed pile of vegetables, like I was saying, or you can also do like a chilled soba noodle dish with it. And so it works very well either way. And that's one of my go-tos as well, because it doesn't cook over the stove that long. You're not having to be over a hot skillet for a long time while you're caramelizing things, anything like that. So it's great if it's when the heat wave comes and you're in a position where you're just wanting to make something. You can make a lot of it and keep it in the fridge. It also freezes really well. So I'm going to go ahead and review the ingredients with you, and then we'll dive right in. One of the things that I definitely want to talk about as we're going through the recipe is kind of the heritage behind miso sauce. Well, miso in general. So miso is from Japan, and it is centuries old, and it's incredibly versatile. So you can absolutely, I'm sure a lot of folks have had like miso soup and things like that. But like we're doing today, you can make a sauce with it. You can also make it into spreads. It makes like a really good sweet and savory spread that you can put on all kinds of breads, vegetables, things like that. You can turn it into a dip. A lot of folks have seen it in salad dressing. So what miso is, and I'll get out the container of miso that I'll be using today. I am using Westbury Natural. And as I said in the ingredients, I'm using a red paste today. So what miso is it's basically a combination of soybeans, a grain, barley, rice is what you're usually going to see, and a mold, koji is what it's referred to as. And it can take months or years, depending on how the person is processing it. And it's what's great is it pretty much lasts indefinitely. So you can keep your miso, a little bit goes a long way. So you could have miso in your fridge for 3 years open, and that's fine. As long as it's stored properly, it'll probably get a little bit thicker as it loses moisture, and it can get a little bit stronger and more pungent. But for the most part, you're not at risk of, again, if it's stored properly, you're not at risk of having it go bad. So I'm gonna just hold this up to the camera so you can see what it looks like. It's, a little firmer than peanut butter, and it kind of has a cookie dough consistency. And like I said, this one's a red one. Sometimes you'll see white miso. So it's a fermented paste, and basically it's crushing up soybeans, and then that koji, that mold, is grown on either rice, barley, or other soybeans. And it's just, if I had to describe it for folks who haven't tasted just the paste, right? Like when you have miso soup, you're tasting other kinds of broth, and it usually has kind of a salty flavor to it. I would say miso has kind of a sweet, earthy, sometimes sour, sometimes briny taste to it. And if you get a dark one, it certainly can have higher salt, and it is going to have a more intense flavor. And if you have a lighter one, that's usually like, it'll look like a snickerdoodle cookie dough, or like a peanut butter cookie dough. It'll be blonder. That's going to be a little bit more mellow and a little bit more sweet. So as it is pasteurized, or as it is processed and it is fermenting longer, it turns more intense in color, and then it does have higher salt. So if you're somebody who's looking for a little less salt in your diet, you're going to want to go with a more mellow, blonder miso. So there are over 1,300 kinds of miso that are recognized by the official Miso Society in Japan. However, in the United States, 95% of the miso that we're going to have access to in the United States is going to be kome miso, which is made with rice. So it is going to have soy in it, but the grain that it is paired with will be rice. Every once in a while, perhaps if you go to some Asian markets, you can find some barley and some other variations. But for the most part, what we're working with as a consistency across the board is going to be a rice-based miso. So what we're going to do today is we are taking, we've got our cashews, and they are the whole unroasted raw cashew. This sauce will not work if you use a roasted cashew because we're turning this into a cream. And if you've roasted it, then you've already extracted a lot of the fat that was in it and it's come out, and that's what's giving it that crisp crunch flavor. So when we are dealing with that raw cashew, it's got kind of that chewier texture. So we're going to be dealing with 1 cup of raw cashews, 1 cup of water, or if you were with us the other week for the soup stock and base, this is a great way to use that up. So you can use the soup stock and base, or you can use 1 cup of water. And then we're going to use 1/4 of a cup of peanut butter. I would recommend using creamy peanut butter in this situation, unless you're somebody who likes a textured peanut sauce, which is fine. If you don't have creamy peanut butter, absolutely use crunchy. It's going to be fine. It'll just have more of a crunch texture to it. And then 3 tablespoons of miso. And then let me make sure 3 tablespoons of miso, 1 teaspoon of fresh minced ginger, fresh minced garlic. So if you're using fresh garlic, you're going to use more of it. If you're using dried garlic, a little bit goes a long way. So you would use less of it because it is so much more concentrate. So if you're using dried garlic, you're going to want to use just a teaspoon for that. And then we're going to be using 1 teaspoon of the rice wine vinegar. If you're somebody if you don't have a rice wine vinegar, and you can see it's got like a very, it's kind of reflected there. It's got like a apple juicy, very white wine look. If you don't have rice wine vinegar, you can use apple cider vinegar. You could also use white wine vinegar. I would not recommend using just white vinegar. I think that that's going to be a little too harsh. And I would not use a red wine vinegar. That's going to be too fruity. So you can use the apple cider vinegar or white wine in a pinch if you need it. Also, if you just don't have any vinegars, this is adding kind of a complexity, and that acid is going to kind of unlock some of the other flavors that we're working with today. But if you're somebody who you are avoiding vinegars or you don't have any vinegar, you could still make this. And I don't think anyone would be like, ugh, what's wrong with this? It's just not going to have as complex of a flavor palette. So then we're also going to be using 2 tablespoons of sugar. So if you're somebody who likes a deeper flavor, because miso does have such a complex offering for the palate. It does have all of that what we were talking about, umami and salty. So I think it really does well with a darker sugar. So if you don't like dark sugar or you don't have any, you can absolutely, again, the sugar is not taking the stage here. What it's doing is kind of calming down the saltiness that we would find in the miso, the cut bite that we would get from the garlic and the ginger. And then it's also just kind of mellowing out the saltiness from the broth cube, if that's what you're using. So it's rounding things out. So if you use white sugar, don't worry about it. It's still going to be delicious. But I personally like a brown sugar. And just in case folks are in a position where they want to know what is a brown sugar versus a white sugar, or can they make brown sugar on their own? Brown sugar is essentially just white sugar, but cooked in a process that adds in molasses. So a light or a dark brown sugar would work in this case. Either one is fine. A light brown sugar usually has about 3% molasses in it, whereas a dark brown sugar is 6%. So that dark brown sugar has more moisture in it, which is fine in this. We're not worried about moisture content in our sauce. But it is, for a flavor profile, I would say it's something that I would expect to taste in like baked beans or in a gingerbread cookie. It's got that bootstrap molasses flavor. Whereas light brown sugar is something that you might taste in like a little bit of a sugar cookie or something like that. So I don't think there's a wrong sugar you can put in here. I do think if you use the dark sugar, dark brown sugar, I would maybe put less in, taste it, and see if you wanted more. But I think having a bold, sweet flavor is gonna complement that, right? Like we know gingerbread works well. The cutting flavor of ginger, that bright sharpness works very well with brown sugar, with dark brown sugar already. And then adding in something as complex and salty and sweet as miso isn't going to do any problems either. So I think either way, you're going to be fine. But like I said, you could absolutely use agave. You could use white sugar. We're just sweetening it to mellow and round everything out. And then we are going to use 1 chicken broth cube, or again, if you're using that stock that we made the other week. So I like to use Edward & Sons Not Chicken. I do believe they make a low sodium version of this. So again, if you're cutting down on your sodium, then you might want to use just any kind of broth that you've made a low sodium broth or any low sodium cube. So we're going to use 1 cube of this. I used up my stock for making a stew last week. So I unfortunately don't have any left, but it's really good for making a sauce. It kind of really, all that celery and carrot and onion that we cooked for so long, it brings a lot of complexity to this. And this is such a simple sauce that I think it really lets that flavor bloom. If I was making something that was really loud and had a lot of different flavors, I probably wouldn't want to waste all that work on that soup stock. But for this, I think it could really elevate it. So then after that, we're going to use 2 tablespoons of vegetable oil. That's going to be for sauteing. And then 1 teaspoon of sesame oil. That's optional. This is just going to add, again, like a flavor. If you like sesame flavor, sesame oil flavor, one thing is I would make sure that you are using a naturally pressed pure sesame oil. So sometimes you might come across an extra virgin cold pressed and unrefined sesame oil like this guy. And I don't know if you can tell. Yeah. So this is so light, right? This looks like lemonade. This is so dark. This is a much more dark brown flavor. This is what we're going for. This is for cooking. And if you wanted to put like in a salad dressing, since it's extra virgin, it's going to have a very low burning point. So it would smoke pretty easily. So I wouldn't cook anything too intensely on this, but this is not for flavor. This is just a sesame oil that you can make things with, but this is for flavor. This is kind of that roasted, naturally pressed. So this is what we're talking about when we are talking about using sesame oil, if you want. And then chili oil to taste. So I don't think it matters too much. I've got a couple different chili oils here, and I think it's just whatever you want to put in it and how spicy you want it. What I've done with my, oh, here we go. So I've got 1 chili oil that, as you can see, is oil and a bunch of peppers. And that's something that you can do to make your own chili oil. If you're somebody who just has vegetable oil or olive oil or something like that, this one's made out of canola oil and dried chilies and garlic. So you can make your own chili oil. Just let it sit in with those, grind up a couple of the little peppers, let it sit over, I would say, a week or so. And then you're going to want to refrigerate it once you put the peppers in there. So if you're somebody who's in a pinch, you want to make your own chili oil, you don't have access to like an Asian market or your grocery store doesn't carry it. The other kind that I use, this is just a chili oil sauce. This is soybean oil chili. And so it's almost mostly crunchy things. I don't know how much you can see that. It's like more chili now instead of just oil. So it's whatever works best for you. Again, it's optional. If you're somebody who has a really light touch with peppers and spices, or you can't really handle that, don't worry about it. And then you're going to use 1/4 of a cup of finely chopped onions, and then minced or pressed ginger to taste. One other thing that you can add on the optional list is you can do a squeeze of lime. If you are tasting this and it feels too heavy, right? Like you can't really taste the flavors as much as you thought. Maybe it tastes too much, just like peanut butter. Maybe it tastes too salty, too sweet. In that instance, you could squeeze in a little bit of lime, and it should kind of bring out those more subtle flavors. If you don't have a lime, you can also try putting in another splash of a very delicate vinegar and see how that works. But sometimes having that complex, that citrus of squirt is nice, just to, again, add a little bit of difference. So we're going to go ahead and get started. And if anybody has any questions, if you type them into the chat, and then Jacqueline will ask them, because I don't have the chat window open, so I'm not going to be able to see your questions. So we're starting off with our onion. We only need 1/4 of a cup, which is 4 tablespoons. And I like it pretty finely diced. It doesn't have to be almost like an onion spread. It just is something that we're not making a soup here, right? So we don't want our sauce to have really chunky in it. This is just what the onion is doing, is we're going to give it a really good, nice start of foundation of a complex taste. And we don't want it all to be garlic. A lot of times when you're adding onion into a sauce and garlic is going with it, what it is doing is helping with that sulfur in the onion. It's got that sharpness. It's going to complement and hide a lot of the things of the garlic. If you were to cut out the onion, I think that it wouldn't, I don't think there's any one thing that you could take out of this sauce, minus the miso and the peanut butter, that would break what the overall message of the sauce is. But I do think you would get less complexity. So if you were to just have garlic, it would taste like garlic paste, right? Which garlic is delicious. I love garlic. I am almost always saying more garlic. But when we are making sauces, we want to start light on the garlic and add more if needed, because garlic can very quickly overpower everything. And what we're not looking for is a peanut butter and garlic sauce, because you certainly wouldn't need all the rest of these ingredients if that was the situation. So the onion is giving a little bit more balance to that. And it's going to just kind of bloom, add some complexity. And then when you taste, you won't even really taste the onion, but it will help balance out the garlic. So that way, when you taste it, it's going to taste really good and have a lot of diversity in your palate. And it won't just taste like garlic flavored peanut butter. So I've been heating up a skillet, and let's see if we can get the camera over here onto the stove top and switch that, or maybe I can. Let's see if I'm able to do that. Gallery. Oh, no. Okay. So I think if we're going to be able to do it, Jacqueline will be the one that does it, because she's got the camera view. So we've got oil that I'm going to put into my pot. That's the vegetable oil that we had in the ingredients list. And what we're going to do is, while the skillet is heating up, we're going to go ahead and make our cashew sauce. So like the ingredients, or like the recipe says, if you don't have a powerful blender and you've got yourself something that makes smoothies great, but you wouldn't necessarily make a nut butter with, then I would recommend bringing a pot of water or broth, if you're using the stock, to boil, and then letting your cashews sit in that hot water for 15 minutes. You can also just have your cashews soak overnight. If you're trying to be more energy conscientious and you don't want to use that extra heat to bring up the water to boil, you can let them soak overnight. It'll soften them up just the same. And then you can put your cup of cashews and your cup of water or stock into your blender. And that kind of just helps your blender get a head start. So that way it's not in a situation where it's just not going to be able to make this. We don't want it chunky. Just one thing really quickly. I saw somebody ask earlier when I was talking to them about this recipe, do we put the broth cube in here? You can. I don't, but you absolutely can. I put it in when it's hot, so I know that it's more evenly distributing. That's just my preference. There's not any specific reason for that. So it's whatever your preference is. And then another thing I've had people asking, can we make this with any other kind of nut? Like, could we put raw peanuts in this? You could make this with raw peanuts. Peanuts, however, I wouldn't put any peanut butter in it because peanuts do have so much more of a distinct flavor. And so if that's the situation, then I think you're going to be in a situation where you're already going to be having a peanut sauce. They also just don't cream up as much. So if you've seen like a natural peanut butter, you can see like a lot of times it's got a different texture than the more processed peanut butter that's been infused with oil. And so I think you're going to get a different texture of a sauce. And I don't think it's going to come together and hold together as well. It won't have that creamy spread that the cashew sauce does. But I mean, the same thing. I've had some people ask, can I, instead of making peanut sauce, can I make cashew sauce with cashew butter or with almond butter instead? I would not make this sauce with raw almonds because it's just the flavor context will be different. But you could make it with almonds instead of peanut butter. You could do almond butter, or you could do cashew butter. Again, almond butter is drier and it does have a more crumbly texture. You usually don't see it as creamy as peanut butter. So in that situation, I think you are just going to have a different texture. But if you're adding it into the cashew base, you're going to be all right because the cashew is kind of making the cream vehicle for this. So I think you could get away with it. It's just your preference. If somebody really likes almond and can't do peanut butter, absolutely experiment. So I'm going to go ahead and blend this up. So in the Vitamix, as you can see, it didn't take very long. I'll go ahead and pour this into a cup so you can kind of see what its texture is. It basically looks like a cashew milk, right? It coats very nicely, but it's pretty runny. It's not super thick. So we're just gonna go ahead and set this aside. And now I'm gonna go ahead and get my onions that I've chopped up, and I'll put these in a little dish so you can see the texture. Like I said, I didn't dice these super finely. Let's see. Yeah, I didn't dice them super, super fine. I know that I'm gonna have a little bit of texture in the sauce and I'm fine with that. You can dice them more finely if you want. They just don't need to be big chunks. So I usually stick for pinky fingernail size or smaller. So we go ahead and add this into the oil on the stove. And so what we're going to be doing with that, we're going to let this cook for it's not going to take super long because we have we've cut them up so finely, they can cook pretty quickly. So we're just gonna let them cook and wait until they're kind of glistening. I think in the sauce or in the soup stock demo we did a while ago, I showed you the difference between when an onion's getting kind of translucent and glistening versus when it's freshly cut. So we just want to see that they're kind of sweating. You can smell them. We don't want them to start burning, and we don't want them to brown. We want them to be in the beginning process of browning. So we got to keep an eye on them. This is not a stage where I would kind of like go check on something else or check our phone, because they turn very quickly. So I'm gonna put these back in a little glass for you just so you can see the texture of them, because they are done. So let's see if I can get that to show up. You can see they're not browned. They're getting kind of a sweaty look to them. So this is ready now for the next step. So then after we are doing this, if you are adding the garlic and the ginger, we're gonna go ahead and add that. I find that the ginger adds kind of a brightness to this. I am using, a pressed ginger. It's a ginger puree. There we go. So it's very liquidy. It's almost like a thick ginger juice. I know that there are a lot of products where there's like dried ginger, not the powder, but like dried ginger. You can put that in at this time. And we just want it to cook a little bit. Ginger's the kind of thing similar to an onion, similar to a couple of other vegetables, where if you put it in after everything else, you lose a lot of the flavor. And cashew and coconut both are really good at muting flavors. So it's our job to saute them and kind of amp up the flavor before we add it in. That's another, if you were somebody who doesn't like or can't do cashew, you could put coconut milk in for this cup. If you were in a situation where you didn't have a strong blender, you don't have cashews, you can totally sub it for coconut milk. Coconut milk, I think, can complement a peanut sauce and the miso, but it also, again, it can dominate. Coconut can have a very strong flavor. If I were gonna use coconut in this, I would use mostly the water that comes with it, with maybe a spoonful of the fattier, creamier part. But I certainly wouldn't do all the fatty, creamy part. So now I'm gonna go ahead and add in my garlic. And because I'm using the dried garlic, I'm gonna be using less than if I was using the fresh. And also dried garlic, well, all garlic can get bitter if it's overcooked. So we're only putting it in at the very end of the sauteing process. We don't want we don't want all of the ingredients that we just put in there to now have the taste of a burnt garlic. So we just put it in at the very end, stir it up just a little bit. I'll show you what this is looking like. Not a lot, you know, just a little bit. It's not burnt, it's not browning. You know, those onions are still pale. And the garlic is not turning brown. So now we're gonna go ahead and add in our cashew cream or milk, if that's what you want to use. Whatever cream that is that you are using.
Danielle.
Yeah.
Do you want to turn on the camera above your pot? You need to open the Zoom on your phone.
I am. I'm logged in as a person on my phone. Danielle 2.
Okay.
Sorry, I was a secret viewer.
Okay, now I can adjust. Sorry.
Now I can look like a food blogger. Picture Instagram. And all right, so let's see. Yeah, there we go. Oh, I wonder. Okay, ask to. Oh, I need to turn my camera on. I see. Yes. Okay. And let me switch my camera view around. There we go. So you can see already that this is starting to thicken up. Remember when I showed you right after the blender, it had kind of a milk texture, and putting it on the heat has kind of started to thicken it up. And so this is going to be up to you on how much you want this to be like a thick gravy, how much you want this to be like a thin sauce, whatever it is that you are looking for. Let me bring this lamp over here so you can see the color a little bit better too, without trying to bleach it out here. So and my skillet runs hot, so you can see it's trying to solidify on the bottom. So I've gone ahead and turned mine down because we don't want the bottom to burn. This is a great time. I mean, that's a great indication that your sauce wants to burn on the bottom, and then you could walk away and get distracted and then come back and you could find out that you have a solid on the bottom and liquid on the top. So I've gone ahead and turned that down. It's also trying to bubble, which means that this is going to be a little bit warmer than I want to introduce the miso into. But this is a great time for me to put in the sauce. So I'm going to go ahead and stop the camera for this. And we'll go back over here. So this is a great time if you're using the cube and you didn't put it in during the blending process. We want to do this while it's warm. It's just not something that likes to dissipate into cooler liquids. So we don't want to have it be like lukewarm, even just not hot. It kind of sits there. So I've turned my skillet down. I've added in my cube, and I want to keep an eye and make sure it'll make brown swirls, which I will show you. So turn my camera back on. So it's making brown swirls, which you can see like right over here. And I keep eyes on where the cube is, so that way I can see that I am getting it. Nothing makes for a more unpleasant surprise in your sauce when somebody is in the unfortunate situation of having gotten a bite of it. So like we talked about earlier, you can absolutely put this in when you're doing the blending. I just like to put it in the tasting phase when I'm kind of like getting everything all together, all my flavors together, but that's just, I think, a personal preference. So we can see I don't see any more brown swirls anymore. I see a couple of chunks of onion, but I'm looking and I don't see any streaks of bouillon. So we're at a good phase. We've gone ahead and mixed this up pretty well. So let's move this back. I'll go ahead and stop this. So now we can go ahead and we're going to add in the rest of our ingredients. And let's see, get back to my page here. So now I've turned down the heat, and I've added in all of the cashew cream, and then I can add in my remaining ingredients. And I did note we want to add the miso for last, and there's a couple reasons for that, but I will get to that as we are adding in our ingredients. So let's see, I'm gonna get my peanut butter. And the peanut butter can be to taste. If you're someone who really feels like you are here for peanut butter and you want more than a 1/4 of a cup, absolutely live it up. But I think that this is a good starting point. We don't want it to be so peanut buttery that it's hard to appreciate the miso. Peanut and miso go together so well because the peanut is kind of like smooth and creamy, and it reciprocates to salt very nicely. And then we've got the salty sweetness of miso. I think the peanut butter is good to go in as one of your first ingredients, just because if it's a kind of peanut butter that's a little thick, it needs to smooth out. So show you what it looks like here. There we go. So you can see like I did use crunchy because I don't have smooth, which is fine because I usually on my stir fries, I like to put in chopped peanuts on top anyways. Now, if your sauce starts to look too thick for you, you can absolutely add more water. That's totally fine. If you make things too salty, let's say you taste it and you think, this is too salty, this is too sweet, this is too spicy, whatever the situation is, you can add more water. I think I'm going to add more water to this. And I just added in a little bit more, especially because I know my stovetop runs so hot. So I'm just going to let my peanut butter kind of start to incorporate into that cashew. And then I'm going to go ahead and add in the rest of my ingredients. I'm going to take my teaspoon of rice wine vinegar and add that in. And again, like the great thing with so many sauces and soups is really that we don't have to worry about if we spill a little bit extra in there. It's not like baking where it's a science and we're working on very specific chemistry that has to happen in the right proportions. If we make a misstep, we can always fix it. If you put in too much sugar, you can put in more acidity to kind of cut that. If you make it too spicy, you can put in sweetness to help cut that. I know that we talked about that when we were making the marinara sauce. So there's a lot of options that you can do to help kind of continue sailing smoothly if you make a misstep. So I'm going to go ahead and add in my 2 tablespoons of brown sugar. This is also a great time to use sugar that might be getting a little dried up. So I'll show you, this sugar's kind of on the end of it's turning itself into a solid here. So this is a great time for that. It's going to be much easier for me to use this now instead of then trying to like make cookies with this. So I can just go ahead and I'm going to take what is a little bit more than 2 tablespoons. I'm going to put that into my sauce and let it start soaking that up and breaking it down. I usually do save some of my brown sugar that's on its last leg for exactly a sauce type reason. If I'm going to make a teriyaki sauce or something that needs to have a complex, bold sweetness to it, because I'm certainly not going to fight with it. So I can put it into a gingerbread cookie or anything like that. So because I used a dark brown kind of brown sugar, this is going to add to the color. It's going to darken it up a little bit. And then we're going to go ahead and we put in our broth already. We're going to take our vegetable oil is fine. I'm going to put in my sesame oil and add it in. This is just going to give a little bit of that flavor. Helps just give like that Asian food palette. And I think that the sesame complements salty and sweet really nicely as well. And then chili oil to taste. And because I am using stuff that's going to be mostly crunchy, so I can just add that in. And even though we do have ways where we can fix it if we make things too spicy, boy, it sure is easier to just go a little bit at a time. And instead of having to make a gallon now of sauce because you put in sweetener to help battle out the spiciness, and then now you need to help undo that. So now you need to have something that takes away. So you put in another broth cube, and now you're just kind of chasing that flavor. And then miso is going to be the last ingredient that we put in here. And the reason why we're doing it last is because, as we talked about earlier, the koji, the probiotic bacteria that this lives in, or that it has living in it, it's alive. It's good for our guts. And if we cook it at a high temperature, we are going to kill the bacteria that lives in it. So 2 things will happen if we cook it at a high temperature. One is we'll be in a situation where we have lost the bacteria that was making miso. Now, essentially what you have is you have a soybean paste. But 2, the bacteria is what gives it the complex flavor. So what you'll find is if you were to overcook your miso sauce, oftentimes it'll taste, depending on what kind of miso you're using, it can taste bitter, it can just taste salty, or it can have kind of I would say a sweet bitter taste. It's mostly sweet with like a very fine hint of bitter aftertaste. So if you imagine like if you were to burn some sugar or have some caramel, that's actually a really good one. If you had some caramel that was just a little burnt on the bottom. So like mostly good as you're chewing it and you're enjoying it, but then there's kind of that, you know, like when you smell burnt popcorn in the air. And even if you didn't eat the burnt popcorn, you can taste it almost on the back of your throat. That's what you can get in if you were to overcook your miso. So we don't want to have that happen. It's not something we have to be super worried about because you'd have to be adding it to like a good boiling pot. But remember, when we added in the cashew cream, we turned the heat down really low. So this is really just kind of like warming right now. I'm going to go ahead and turn on the camera so that you can see. And then I'll bring my light over so that we can see. There we go. So you can see how the color has changed since we started. And we can also see I added in that water, so we're back to that kind of original texture that we had. You can also see it's not trying to cook on the bottom now. This is thick. My skillet's very, very low now. I'm not worried about it sticking to the bottom. But this is still warm, right? It's something, here's my brown sugar that I'm still breaking up. So this is still warm, so it's gonna easily transfer the miso as I add it in. Now, if you just wanted a peanut sauce, this is a pretty good peanut sauce just on its own, but I think you're missing a lot of the complexity that you're gonna get when we add in the miso. So this is a great time. Like as you can see, like I can touch my pan. I wouldn't recommend doing that at home unless you really know your stovetop and your pot well. But so the pot is hot to the touch, but it's not scalding. So this is a great time to add in my miso. So just stop this. So we go ahead, add in the miso. And again, this is to taste. So if you find yourself really enjoying the flavor, let's move this light so I don't look like a heavenly being. If you catch yourself really enjoying the flavor, then absolutely add more. But if it kind of is just something that you think, oh, it's fine, but I'm not crazy about it, you can just make this into a peanut sauce. And this is very versatile. Another thing you can do to kind of add into that is you can put in a little dash of soy sauce. That really adds some good umami as well. It's got like the saltiness. It's got some dark brine. A sweet soy sauce is also really good for this. If you're in the mood for making this just a little bit more. So you just want to keep stirring this. Turn on the camera again. Show you kind of chasing the miso here. So we just want to, you can see I just have a couple of lumps of it here, and I'm just going to keep stirring it until the lumps go away. There are worse things to have big bites of if you were making a sauce and putting it on something, but if for some reason I've been stirring this for more than 2 minutes and I still have these lumps, then I can go ahead and turn up the heat just a little bit more, because the heat's what's going to help keep it breaking down. So one thing to know about this is you can freeze it, absolutely. It freezes very well. Just a little wives' tale tip for freezing things. If you freeze something that has a relatively high fat content, then you're not going to want to fill your jar up to the very top. So let's see. So this is a bun bao house soup, and you can see it has a pretty decent amount of fat because it's this ring right here on the top. So I did not fill it all the way up to the top, because had I done that, this jar would have cracked. So I like to always keep a little bit of space. Now, if you were putting in something that has relatively low fat, you don't have to be as worried about it. So like, for instance, this Coke bottle, the water is literally up. I don't even know if I can unscrew this cap because the water is all the way up. The only air bubble is right there. So because this doesn't have as much fat, we don't have to worry about it cracking as much. This is cashew sauce that we made into Alfredo sauce for our sauce series, our first sauce series. And I just went ahead and kept it just at a nice half, threw it in the freezer, lasts forever and ever. So that's fine. So this freezes very well. It's the cool thing about it is if you freeze it, the bacteria is not negatively impacted by freezing. But just be aware that if you defrost it, you get it out of the freezer, you put it in the fridge, it's going to be fine. But it is negatively impacted by microwaving for the same reason why we don't want to cook it at a high temperature. So if we are in a situation where you wanted to have this for lunch the next day and you microwaved it, you are going to be killing that bacteria. However, when we microwave it, instead of cooking it in oil or cooking it in like this high heat surrounding with boiling water, we're doing it a little bit differently. So you don't have to worry about the negative tastes of burnt miso. It's very similar to, again, like if you were to cook garlic and cook it on the skillet and overcook it, and it's going to have that bitter taste to it, versus if you were to microwave it, it would get mushy, but we're not, like, the chemical reaction is different. So we're not breaking it down the same way that we are when we're cooking something on the skillet. So while the bacteria is going to die, it's not going to be, you're not going to get those health benefits. We don't have to worry as much about whether or not we're going to ruin the integrity of the taste of the sauce. It will still taste fine. It'll taste very much the same way. And in fact, I think this sauce is better the next day. I think that the chili oil kind of relaxes and permeates through. Most sauces and soups taste better the next day. So it had time to sit, be at room temperature. We don't want to put hot soups or sauces into the refrigerator. That's bad for our refrigerator. That really challenges the safety of the food that's in here. You've just put this hot, steamy thing into a closed system, and then it's going to have to like work overtime. And then it's increasing the temperature in your refrigerator. So we don't want to do that. Plus, it's not good for your food. So if I were wanting to take this and get it ready to put in the refrigerator, I would want to take it, put it into a shallow pan so that it's like the most surface area possible, which is allowing the most heat to get out. That way I don't have like the bottom being really hot and the top being cool. You know, like when you microwave mashed potatoes and then you think on the top it's really hot and you're like, oh boy, good, this is ready. And then you get down to the bottom and it's rock cold, just freezing cold. That's what we don't want. This is the opposite. So more surface area, everything is cooling at an even temperature. And then I can pour that into whatever jar I'm going to save it in the freezer. I can put it in the fridge, and that'll work out great. So I'll go ahead and I'm going to put this into a jar so you can see the texture, and you can see what it looks like. It's pretty much, I have a couple little lumps left of miso, but for the most part, this is ready to go on some noodles. So you can see it's pretty saucy. I did just rinse this out, so it's got a little bit of water on it, but we've got pretty good consistency. It'll make for a really good, this is what we started with, right? This is the cashew cream that was so liquidy. So now I've got this nice sauce, got those onion chunks in there for a little bit of body, a little bit of flavor. And yeah, I think it's going to be really great for any kind of noodle, rice, tofu dish, veggie dish that you want to put this on. Does anybody have any questions? If anybody does, or if you try it out and you end up like needing some tips, or maybe something didn't go as planned and you want to try to figure out why, you can always feel free to email me at Danielle, DANIELLE, at Northwest Veg, NWVEG. What are we making next time? I do not know what's on the schedule. That's a very good question. Jacqueline, do you know what we're making next time?
I think it's still to be determined.
We might have our guest who was going to be today, but he had a couple of folks that he needed to give some attention to. He was going to do a Spanish aioli. So if his schedule works out and if he's able to be in kind of a mentally safe space, then I would love to have him here to make a Spanish aioli sauce, because that sounds amazing and I want to slather that on everything. But I know we're trying to check in and see how his schedule's looking. Okay, well, if anybody else has any other questions, feel free to reach out, and thank you once again for joining us.